Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thank you so much for joining today, second day of our meeting. Shall we wait a little couple of minutes that I see many people are joining the meeting? Let's wait few minutes before starting our program, today program. Thank you. All right, I think we can start. Yeah, welcome to our second day of the expert group meeting. Now yesterday we focused on mostly what were the major challenges that we experienced this round, and then what were the main lessons that we learned. So now today we are moving to session 4 on the organization of the work of the revision of the principle and recommendations, and we are going to discuss the scope of the work of each task forces that actually UNSD propose. Now, I would like to invite our chair, Ismail Lubat from UN ESQA, who is a regional statistician at the ESQA, and then we are working closely on census activities together with Ismail. Ismail, floor is yours. You are muted, Ismail. No, we cannot hear you. You are muted.
Hello.
Yeah, okay, great.
Okay.
We hear you very
Good
well now.
morning and good evening, everyone. Thank you for inviting me to share this very important session. I see it's a revolution or a modernization of principles and recommendations. So this session is very important. And I liked the way that was presented. And we, in this session, the organization of the work of revision of the principles and recommendations and review of the task force. So we'll see in this session, the objective is to review the work that sent to you in the concept notes and to look at the task teams, the 9 task teams, and to be discussed in this session. And then to listen from the experts, their perspective in this regard. And finally, we hope that this work plan and this task teams be approved by the end of the meeting. So first, I would like to invite my colleague Seifi to have this presentation of the brief presentation on the work plan for the revision and the proposed task teams. Seifi.
Thank you, Ismail. Do you see the presentation?
Yes, go on.
Okay, hello everyone again. I will be making UNSD's presentation under session 4. This presentation will have 2 parts. The first part will focus on summarizing some of the feedback that we have received from you, the members of the expert group, who filled out the questionnaire that we sent to you a few weeks ago. The summary of your feedback will pertain to the content of the PNR, how to improve the content of the PNR. A summary of feedback on other aspects of the PNR, on the structure, on recommended topics will be presented to you in the subsequent sessions. So with regard to improving the content of the PNR, the questionnaire had 4 questions. The first being on the content of the PNR, whether or not it adequately discusses all relevant topics for the 2030 round. This question had 3 multiple choice questions. Yes, fully agree. Yes, partly agree, or no. And if the respondent picked no or yes, partly agree, then they were asked to provide suggestions for how to improve the content of the PNR. The second question was on which parts and chapters of the PNR require substantial revision. The third question asked respondents to indicate which of the themes from a specified list of response categories require substantial revision or additional guidance in the next version of the PNR. So respondents could pick several responses. And the fourth question was for respondents to suggest new issues or topics that need to be elaborated in the next version of the PNR. So these are issues and topics currently not dealt with in the current version of the PNR, but respondents would like to see in the PNR for the 2030 round. So with regard to the first question, whether or not the current version of the PNR, its content adequately discusses all relevant topics for the 2030 round, only about a third of the respondents felt the current version can also serve as adequate guidance for the next round. But the vast majority felt that the PNR needs to be substantially revised in order for it to be relevant for the 2030 round. Question 3 provided a list of pre-specified themes, which respondents were encouraged to select as many of them as they think are relevant in terms of themes that require substantial revision or additional guidance. And as you can see from this chart, and no surprise, it came up during the discussions yesterday as well. Nearly 70% of respondents said elaboration on the use of administrative data would be needed in the next version of the PNR. There should be also substantial elaboration on the use of technology, on census methodologies, on quality assurance, on the use of geospatial information, on emergency preparedness and contingency planning. And then, so these are the ones I just mentioned, and also multimode data collection. So these are themes where 40% of the respondents indicated these are themes that require substantial elaboration in the PNR for the 2030 round. So in terms of the responses to open-ended questions pertaining to question 1, 2, and 4, we try to summarize the responses under these categories: and planning, methodology, quality assurance, geospatial information, communication, publicity, use of electronic data collection, reliance on technology, and census dissemination products and utilization. So I will provide highlight some of the feedback we received under these categories. In terms of planning, there were feedbacks were received on the need to improve elaboration on how to cover hard to enumerate groups such as nomads, indigenous populations, the homeless. Elaboration was suggested on census legislation, especially with respect to strengthening data privacy provisions. Feedback was received on the need for having guidance on contingency planning and for responding to emergencies and crisis management. There was also feedback that there is a need for elaboration on risk management and to also specify some examples of risks to the census operation. There was also a suggestion the importance of documenting all census operations, including using the documentations, particularly those from the previous round, and use them for planning the next census round. There was also suggestion that we need elaboration on resource mobilization and how to develop work plans for the census operation. Also, elaboration was suggested for planning, organizing, and managing non-traditional census methods, especially those that rely on the use of administrative registers. Also, elaboration was requested on how censuses, population housing censuses, can contribute to the monitoring of the SDGs and other international and regional development commitments. In terms of methodology, there were suggestions to review the essential features of the census, especially taking into account the characteristics of register-based censuses. There was also suggestion for guidance on the use of administrative data for censuses and how to transition to register-based censuses. There is also a request for guidance to be available in the next version of the PNR on combined censuses and also on all variants of register-based censuses. There was also a need for elaboration on the operational aspects of register-based censuses. Recommendations were also requested to be made for elaboration to be available in the next version of the PNR on the use of short and long forms, and what contents need to go on the short forms, whether there is a list that experts can agree on. There was also a request for more elaboration on the use of administrative data sources to supplement traditional census data, to improve the quality of census data, and to validate census data. The guidance was also requested on estimation methods for areas that are inaccessible due to security issues, conflicts, and also elaboration on similar techniques, including geospatial modeling techniques. In terms of quality assurance, feedback we received indicates that more elaboration is required on the assessment of census results and also adjustments to census results and how to do the adjustments. There is also suggestion that we need more elaboration on how to communicate the results of quality assessments to users. There is also suggestion that there should be more elaboration on the use of administrative records and alternative data sources for improving the quality of census operations and the quality of census data. A quality framework for register-based censuses and for combined censuses was also suggested as an area that requires elaboration in the next version of the PNR. There was also a request for recommendations for quality assessment methods other than the PES for countries that rely on the use of administrative data. There was also suggestions for elaboration in the next version of the PNR on the use of advanced technologies, innovative technologies such as artificial intelligence, machine learning, in order to enhance the accuracy and efficiency of data collection and processing, particularly when it comes to the classification and coding of open-ended responses to questions such as those on occupation, industry, economic activity related topics. In terms of geospatial information, there was suggestion for more elaboration on the use of geospatial information from the perspective of enterprise geospatial data management, and not from the perspective of using desktop GIS software, satellite imageries, and GPS, which several respondents felt are no longer significant challenges for several NSOs. There is also suggestions for having recommendations on how to collect on the importance of collecting infrastructure data during the mapping or the collection of geographic information. There was also a request for guidance on grease-based census outputs. In terms of communication, publicity, and outreach to hard to reach groups, hard to enumerate population groups, there were suggestions for the next version of the PNR to elaborate on strategies for addressing the politicization of censuses, fears, misinformation, fake news about census operations that may negatively impact it. There is also suggestions for having more elaboration on how to communicate census results to users. There is also suggestions for having more elaboration on good practices on how to conduct an outreach in engagement with hard to enumerate population groups. There are also suggestions for more elaboration on strategies for using social media in census publicity campaigns. When it comes to electronic data collection technologies, there were several suggestions for having more elaboration on multimode data collection methods, including on how to resolve duplications and assure quality. There are also suggestions for having elaborate discussions on real-time monitoring and quality control when countries employ electronic data collection technologies, including discussion on the use of paradata and dashboards for monitoring and managing field operations. There are also suggestions for providing guidance on technology requirements for the use of electronic data collection technologies. There are also a few suggestions for more elaborations on specific issues around the use of internet-based data collection, in terms of elaboration, in terms of how to distribute the access codes, and also how to manage the response load on the systems during peak days and times where most respondents are likely to be logging in to provide response to the survey, to the census. There are also other requests for more elaboration on the importance of testing and piloting data collection with electronic data collection technologies. In terms of the increasing reliance on technology in census operations, there were multiple suggestions on having more elaborate guidelines on data privacy and security, and also on responsible data management practices in order to build trust with the public. There were also suggestions for having elaborations on the use of cloud technology and cybersecurity as a result of increasing reliance on technology in census operations. On the topic of census dissemination products and utilizations, there were a number of suggestions in terms of census data products. There were suggestions for having elaboration on data visualizations and the need to build a bank of visualization scripts that users can choose and use to visualize the dataset they're working with. There are also suggestions to have dissemination available via API, application programming interface, for exchange of data, large amounts of data. There are also requests for elaboration on microdata dissemination, and also elaboration on the use of synthetic data. Grid-based outputs was also another topic on which elaboration was requested in the next version of the PNR. There are also other suggestions such as elaboration on post-censal estimates and projections, the creation of virtual population cohorts by linking data from multiple censuses, and integrating those with data from administrative sources, from civil registration and vital systems. In terms of use of census data, there were suggestions for more elaboration in the next version of the PNR on the use of census data in disaster prevention and for the management in post-disaster periods. There are also requests for more elaboration in the next version of the PNR on how to use census data in crisis reports, such as those that might have been required during the COVID-19 pandemic. There was also more requests for more elaboration on the use of census data in humanitarian settings and for environmental statistics. There was also suggestions for more elaboration on how the census can be used to monitor the SDGs, not only for directly measuring some of the SDG indicators, but also for enhancing disaggregation and improving the analysis of SDG indicators with the use of census data. There was also one suggestion on how to use census cartography to improve public initiatives and geographic products, such as the OpenStreetMap. In terms of guidance on dissemination, there were suggestions to bring back the tabulation shells not in the current version of the PNR, but in previous versions of the PNR. We used to have a section providing tabulation shells, and there were requests to bring them back in the next version of the PNR. There were requests for having more elaboration on the dissemination of geocoded census outputs, also guidance on producing information on population basis other than the usually resident population. There were also recommendations for providing guidance on the provision of metadata for the adjustment of census data, including providing information on the method of adjustment, the level of adjustments, and etc. And also more guidance on confidentiality and privacy were also requested. So with this, I conclude the first portion of the UNSD's presentation. In this presentation, I tried to summarize some of the feedback we received through the questionnaire that you filled out. 40, we received 40 responses, so I think the response rate is over 80%. So we've received some really good feedback that we have compiled, we have classified, and we will be using this information to revise, to update the concept notes, especially with regard to improving the scope of work for each task team. If there are any questions, I can pause here before moving on to the next part of my presentation, which will focus on how we plan to organize the work of revising the principles and recommendations for the 2030 round.
Thank you very much, Saifi, for this overview of the results. And as you said, if there is any intervention or remarks, contribution in this part, so we open the floor for the colleagues. So,
okay, in that case, let me proceed to the next part. As already mentioned, the questionnaire had 19 questions, and in this presentation, I summarized only the information we collected through 4 questions. And information that we summarized from responses to the other questions will be shared with you in subsequent sessions of this meeting. Okay, so the next part of UNSD's presentation will focus on how we plan to organize the work of revising the PNR for the 2030 round to make it relevant for the 2030 round. So our work plan was already shared with you in the concept note, and I'll try to quickly summarize the information already available in the concept note. So we have now established an expert group. So you are the body of experts who are in charge of shaping the global recommendations for the 2030 round. This expert group is the body that will provide the overall guidance and also provide the overall supervision on the work of the revision. So as I already mentioned, in the concept note, we have proposed 9 task teams so that these teams will divide the work of revision. One task team will work on planning, one task team will work on methodology, one team will work on quality, one team will work on population topics, on etc. So that's how we hope to organize the task teams. The task teams will work in parallel. Sometimes there may be an issue of overlapping interest between 2 task teams, and in those cases, maybe there's a need to coordinate. Each task team will have a chair. So after we conclude this expert group meeting tomorrow, we will share with you our proposal for on the composition of the task teams. We will be assigning you based on the interest that you indicated when you completed the participation form. In the participation form, we asked you to complete, we asked you to indicate areas of interest, your interest in terms of making a contribution to the revision of the PNR. So based on the interest that you've indicated, we will tentatively assign you to one of the teams. And then, I mean, we can negotiate if we assign someone to one group and they're interested in joining another team, we are happy to accommodate. We are happy. And also, one member of this expert group can belong to more than one task team. So there are different ways to make a contribution. So each task team will have a chair. Each team will have a detailed work plan a list of deliverables, a timetable, and of course, a division of labor for revising portions of the text of the PNR in terms of revising existing text or in terms of drafting new text that would be incorporated in the next version of the PNR. We at UNSD will serve as the secretariat for the revision. We will support each task team. A member of UNSD staff will serve as the secretary for each of the task teams, and they will be in charge of administrative matters, keeping notes, taking notes, when there is a need to call for a meeting, taking care of all the administrative matters, so you can focus on the substantive aspects, on the substance of revising, on the substance of providing guidance, on the substance of providing elaboration on the different aspects, which we, at the end of this meeting tomorrow, we hope we agree on what needs to be revised, on what needs to be updated. And so we hope you will focus on the substantive aspect and we'll take care of all the administrative things. In terms of timeline, so we have now, with the convening of this expert group meeting, starting yesterday, we have officially begun the revision of the PNR. So at this meeting, as Francesca indicated at the opening session, at the end of this meeting tomorrow, we hope to adopt the list of task teams that will carve up the different areas of work in terms of revising the PNR. And then the next phase would be the task teams will work on their respective areas. And then at the end of that period, they will submit their revisions, and UNSD will compile all the pieces from the different teams. We'll prepare a draft. And then once we have the draft, we will convene a second expert group meeting. In the second expert group meeting, hopefully in November this year, we will have a face-to-face meeting, a physical meeting. We will have a draft before us. And as a body, the whole expert group will go over this draft text of the PNR. And then we will review it, and then we will solicit your views for additional guidance on refining, fine-tuning, improving the content and the structure of the PNR. So once we have the second meeting, and once we have collected the views of the experts on any additional guidance for revising the PNR, then we enter the second phase, in which the task teams again work in their respective areas and finalize the draft PNR. And then once the second phase of revision has been completed, UNSD will compile all the pieces coming from the different teams. And then we will have our final expert group meeting, the third expert group meeting, perhaps in August 2024. And that will be the last meeting we will have to go over the draft, the second draft, and finalize the PNR for the 2030 round. The next step would be, after the experts group, in the third meeting, after the experts have reviewed it and given their endorsement, we will submit the draft PNR for approval by the UN Statistical Commission, the 56th session of the Statistical Commission, which will convene in March 2025. But we need to submit documentation for the meeting ahead of time. So our deadline for submitting the final draft of the PNR to the Statistical Commission would be in December 2024. So this is the timeline, and this is how we plan to organize the work of the revision. As I indicated, we have proposed 9 task teams, and I'll go over each of the task teams and then highlight some points, the area of work, the scope of work for each task team. And At the end of this presentation, after we have looked at these 9 task themes, we hope to hear from you on your view, whether we need all of these 9 task themes. Do we need fewer task themes? Do we need more? Do we need to combine some of the task themes because the amount of work in one team is not substantial and the work in other teams is more substantial and there's a need to balance? Or maybe the topics are somewhat overlapping, so 2 groups can be merged and we can have fewer task themes. So we would like to hear your view on that at the end of this presentation and during the general discussion. So the first task theme that we have proposed is the task theme on census planning, organizing, and management. This team will review the parts of the PNR, the current PNR, dealing with the planning of census operations. This is contained in part 2 of the current version of the PNR. So this team will review and update the strategic objectives of the census, as well as the role of the census in the national statistical system. This team will also work on providing guidance on the development of emergency and contingency plans, risk management, guidance on emergency preparedness, not only in public health incidents like the COVID-19 outbreak, but also possible man-made and natural disasters, or also due to other risks such as cyber attacks. So hopefully the next version of the PNR will have some guidance on these aspects. This team number 1, will also be responsible for providing guidance on strategies for how to produce more frequent population and housing data. This is, of course, those countries that rely on use of administrative data sources, they can generate more frequent population statistics. But those countries that rely on the traditional method, they conduct their census once every 10 years, in a few cases once every 5 years. So during those long 5 and 10-year periods, what other population statistics can be produced by the NSO so that we have more frequent information, fresh information on population and housing statistics. So this team will be responsible for developing guidelines on these aspects. This team will also be responsible for providing guidance and elaboration on some of the activities that NSOs can carry out in terms of innovating, in terms of experimenting, in terms of modernizing census operations, so that future censuses are more resilient, more advanced, less costly, and they produce higher quality of statistics. So that is task team 1. Task team 2 deals with population concepts and definitions. We've seen that some countries are struggling to apply the concept of, for example, the usual resident population, especially countries that rely on the use of administrative data sources. So this team will review the existing concepts and definitions related to population. For example, the definition for the usual resident population, the definition for the present population present, the target in population to enumerate, population count, service population, daytime population. So there are different population concepts. So this team will review these various concepts and definitions associated with the population. And it will try to clarify in what context these definitions can be applied. This team will also review potential definitions of population that countries that rely on administrative data sources can use as a proxy for measuring the usual resident population. So this team will also discuss, identify hard to count population groups, and also come up with approaches that can be used to reach and to enumerate these groups. Turning to task team 3. Task team 3 will focus on census methodologies and the transition to register-based population housing censuses. So this team will review parts of the PNR, the current PNR that deals with census methodologies. It's a rather small section, and for the next version of the PNR, hopefully it will be a more substantive, more substantial part of the PNR. Also, the current PNR doesn't have much elaboration on the use of administrative data sources. So hopefully in the next version of the PNR, we will have more treatment, more discussion, more guidance on how to use register-based administrative data sources, and also elaborate some generic approach, if you will, for the transition to the use of administrative data sources for compiling census statistics. This team, task team 3, will also review the whole publication of the PNR with a view to incorporating new text on the use of administrative data in the various processes and operations of the census, including during mapping, listing operation, enumeration, data processing, validation, adjustment of census data. So wherever there is a role for the use of administrative data in a census operation, whether the census operation relies on the traditional method of full field enumeration or it's a combined census, wherever there is a role for the use of administrative data sources, we hope this task team will incorporate this relevant discussion in the appropriate sections of the PNR. This team will also be responsible for having some discussion in the PNR on methods for enumerating people living in institutional places. And also this team will also provide guidance on estimation methods for areas that are inaccessible due to conflicts, due to security issues, and for suggesting some innovative approaches that can be used, estimation methods that can be used for estimating the population in those parts of the country where enumeration is not possible. Task team 4 will focus on the use of geospatial information in the census. It will review and revise relevant sections of the current portions, the current version of the PNR, and the team will incorporate relevant recent developments in conducting a geospatially enabled, a geospatially integrated census. This team will also be in charge of introducing the GSGF framework, which was adopted by the UN Statistical Commission. The GSGF framework is the global statistical geospatial framework for integrating statistics with geo information. So there are a number of international initiatives, including the GSGF framework, that can provide the foundation for integrating geospatial information in census processes. So this team will be responsible in terms of integrating these perspectives in census operations. Task team 4 will also be responsible for addressing the relevance and use of geospatial information in the planning and implementation of each stage of the census operation. Geospatial information is in modern censuses is used from planning, during enumeration process, in the post-enumeration process. So throughout the census operation, there is a role for the use of geospatial information, and this team will be in charge of introducing text, relevant text, in the different areas of the PNR. This team will also be developing some elaboration in the PNR on the need to integrate geospatial information with census data in order to make census data, in order that we have a geocoded census data, georeferenced census data that will be rich data that can help in making better policy, better decision, and also in improving the type of analysis that can be done with the use of census data. This team will also address the need to integrate geospatial information in alternative data sources such as administrative records and registers. Moving to task team number 5.
Excuse me. I think since these task teams were delivered to our colleagues in the concept note, so you may go a little bit
Okay.
briefly or quickly on that to let them comment on the task teams and later on. So the time is running and we didn't finish the first part. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Okay, I will move quickly. So task team 5 will focus on quality assurance, quality indicators, and conducting assessments to evaluate the quality of census operations, census processes, as well as census data. Task team 6 will focus on data collection and processing. There have been now progress in terms of advancement in terms of using electronic data collection technologies, CAPI, CAWI, CATI. So this team will be responsible for introducing elaborations in the next version of the PNR on these aspects. Also in terms of multimode data collection. So this team will be responsible for coming up with guidance on use of multimode data collection. Task team 7 will be responsible for communication, dissemination, and utilization. And they will introduce guidance elaborations in the next version of the PNR on topics related to communication, publicity campaigns, dissemination, census data products, on how to utilize census data for different analyses. Task team 8 will focus on recommended topics on population characteristics. So there have been a number of new international recommendations pertaining to international migration, on internally displaced people, refugees, so in a number of areas. So this team will reflect those recently adopted international recommendations and also suggest new topics that could potentially be recommended in the next version of the PNR for collection in the census. Task team 9 will focus on housing characteristics that can be measured in the census. It will review the existing list of housing characteristics that are recommended for collection in the census. And then also taking into account recent international recommendations, try to harmonize the existing definitions, classifications with new internationally adopted recommendations. So if there are also new housing topics that can be suggested for collection in the 2030 round of censuses, this is the place, this is the team that will evaluate proposed new topics that could be collected in a housing census. So this is my last slide. So as I already mentioned, one of the expected outcomes from this meeting is the approval of the task teams by this expert group. The work of the revision will be carried out by the task teams. So it is important that we have an agreement on the number of task teams we need and also the areas each task team will cover. So in order to help discussion, we would like to ask these 4 questions. So in your opinion, are the proposed 9 task teams sufficient to carry out all these revisions that we intend to implement in the next version of the PNR? Or do you see a need for combining some of the task teams? Or do you see a need for adding more task teams? Also, in terms of defining the scope of work for each task team, what is your opinion? Are they well defined? Do they need more elaboration? So we'd like to hear your views on these matters. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Saifi. So we open the floor for the colleagues to comment on the fourth question that raised by Saifi. So the floor is yours.
Ismail, you may first invite the countries that in the agenda we have list of discussant.
Yes, we have the countries, but I think we need just first to have a reflection about the roadmap that UNSD proposed. This is very important, and then we will go for the discussion. So if there is, yes, we have two hands, Yusuf and.
Thank you, Dr. Ismail, and happy to see you again. Just I have two comments, or maybe that's a question. Yes, I can agree with that. You can divide the let's say the committee in nine group. Let's say maybe we need more or less. It depends by the task inside of each group. But my question here, how you are going to assign a member for each group? Is there any way we can maybe, or any member they would like to select it, which group they want to share with? And also about task group number 9, about the housing. Will that task also, they are going to include the household and income survey as well, or just this is for the house census? Thank you so much.
Thank you, Yusuf. So we have Thorodog.
Hello, yes, thank you. I think overall I would agree with the general structure of the proposed task teams and their content. My colleagues who are working on urban statistics have asked that we consider where the methodology for the definition of urban and rural areas should be included. They note that the UN Statistical Commission has endorsed a new methodology for the definition of urban and rural areas. And although urbanization is included as one of the core topics in the previous recommendations, it's not clear to me whether this should be covered by the task teams on the topics or indeed under the geospatial areas. But I've been asked particularly to mention that because they would like to see this new methodology fully included within the principles and recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we move to Jeff.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It was very encouraging to see that administrative data was one of the highest rated area for development in the survey results. I'm interested in any thinking about whether administrative data itself would be a topic for one of the task teams, given its importance and the extent of revision that may be required. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we go to the last colleague, Afsani.
Yes, thank you very much. I also agree in general with the structure proposed, and we, as one of the colleagues also, Jeff also mentioned that we have had the admin data as the most popular topic, and I see that we have task team 3 that is also responsible for looking into the admin data. And if I got it correctly, this team is also responsible in reviewing the whole text of the PNR and to see that all the aspects have been included in different parts. And at the same time, in most of the task teams, we have some task related to the use of admin data. So I'm just thinking that maybe this overlaps with the task team number 3. Maybe we can have one task team on admin data, and we can take the tasks that are related to admin data from the other task teams and move them all to the new one. This is my thinking. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Saifi, so we have Marcin. So do you want to comment on the questions, or we'll go to the 6 discussant and we'll have
No, I have rather 2 technical questions. The first one, who will be responsible for preparing the final version of P&R documents? I mean technical things. Do we have to do that within all TT groups, or rather it will be done by some other group, maybe secretary? And the second question, as far as I know, we should improve all chapters for P&R document. Is it possible to have an access to editable version of P&R? It would help a lot. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So, Saifi?
Yes, thank you for all those questions. Let me go to Yusuf's question first. How do we assign expert group members to the different task teams? I think when you are nominated to join the expert group body, we asked everyone to complete participation form. One portion of the participation form required participants to indicate which areas of the census operation they would like to make a contribution in terms of the revision. So you have already indicated your interest in that regard. So we will make the initial assignment based on that. But of course, as I already mentioned, we are very happy to entertain any proposals you have. For example, we assign you to task team number 1, but you are interested in joining task team number 8. We're happy to accommodate you. So we will make the initial suggestion, and then we wait for your feedback. And then we'll try to figure out how to accommodate your interest. So we are flexible in terms of giving accommodations to your interests. So we of course we want everyone to contribute in their areas of expertise, in areas where they are very strong, and they can make a substantial contribution. So it's not just also interest, but also can you make a substantial contribution? So we will be happy to hear your feedback, and we'll try to make we'll accommodate your interest in terms of joining which group. The second question was David from Eurostat. Where does urban statistics fit? We are very much aware of the GURBA initiative. It has been adopted by the UN Statistics Commission. So the application of the definition of urban and rural, and I mean, it's not just only the topic of urban, but there is also the underlying use of geospatial technologies, geospatial information. So we see people with coming from the GURBA background potentially can participate in 2 task teams. The task team number 4 on geospatial information, and task team number 8 on recommended population characteristics, because defining the urban population, the rural population, corresponds to recommended topics on population characteristics. So there are 2 areas. Actually, there is a third area, also dissemination, because of their background in use of geospatial information, they can also make a contribution to the task team 7, which deals with dissemination of grid-based outputs, geocoded census outputs. So I can potentially see the GURBA colleagues making a contribution in 3 task teams. Moving on to Jeff from the SPC. And also the question overlaps with Afsaneh from ESCAP on how do we see admin data. So currently, admin data is covered under task team number 3. but my feeling is that you're making a suggestion that admin data should have its own task team. So, I mean, I opened the debate. So how do the other members of the expert group feel? Do we need a separate team on use of administrative data? Or the current proposal, task team number 3, which deals with census methodology and the use of administrative data. Is that sufficient? UNSD, we feel it's sufficient because the part on methodology is not very substantial in terms of the work that's required, but the work on incorporating relevant text throughout the various census processes on the use of admin data, that could be substantial. So anyway, we'd like to hear your view. Other experts, what do you feel? And then the next question was, how do we prepare the draft? So each task team will work in its respective area. It will revise specific portions of the current version of the PNR. And then we, as the Secretariat for the Revision, UNSD, will collect the various pieces coming from the various task teams, and we will compile, we will format, and we will prepare the draft, the first draft, the second draft, and the final draft. In terms of whether or not we can make an editable version of the PNR available, definitely we have a Microsoft Word version, and we will be sharing that with you in the coming days. Thank you.
Thank you, Saifi, for your clarifications. Sorry, Thomas, I will keep you for the second round of the questions because we have to invite our countries to have their reflections on this in this regard. So we have 6 countries, and for each countries we have 5 minutes. So we'll start with Australia with Mark Harding. Mark.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thanks for the opportunity to speak. I'll try to keep it brief to leave more time for discussion for everybody. But first, I'll just want to say that I'm very supportive of the proposal overall, and I think the way that the work has been organised into task teams, it'll bring that sort of focus and energy to each of the important components in the PNR. And I think the timeline provides the space to undertake the tasks there. And having the 3 expert group meetings really does provide good sort of momentum drive to bring the work together at key times. So I'm very supportive of what's been presented today and in the concept note. In terms of the task teams themselves, my feeling was that there was good coverage of the components of the PNR and the key areas. Everything that that I had thought about and might be useful to consider in this revision can be included, and the challenges and the themes that have been discussed yesterday and today, I think all fit into the scope of one or more of these identified task teams. There is that issue of a little bit of overlap, and I think that is going to be very hard to avoid across 9 task teams with these components. There will be things that fall into a few categories. And so I do have a question on that in a little while, but I'll get to that in a second. I also thought that the scope outlined in the task teams, I think, is a good level of detail. It's providing opportunities to reflect and think about the different parts of scope without being too prescriptive to essentially constrain the value that I think the experience of the expert members present can provide. So I'm quite pleased with the way it's presented in the concept note. A couple of, I guess, broad practical questions. One was about the coherence of the revisions and across the whole document. So different people, different teams editing and revising in different areas, and just wondering exactly how we're sort of going to ensure that the document hangs together with consistent terminology and language throughout. And the other sort of practical aspect that I was thinking about was accessibility. So so it obviously is a very content-rich and large document, and we want to put a lot more information in it from the things that we've been discussing. So I guess I'm interested in whether people find it easy to navigate, and is the index effective as in its current form, whether we should include links or other things, or is there other ways that we should help people navigate the content. So some broad questions that don't really appear within the task teams, but possibly more of a UNSD secretariat aspect here or something, and I wasn't sure if that was being incorporated or thought about. So there's just some broad comments. I don't want to take longer than 5 minutes, but just I'll give a few more specific things to the scope of the different task teams. I'm very supportive of the inclusion of more guidance around I guess the risk mitigations and management, and also the crisis management. I think potentially providing some guiding strategic risks that are common to a number of countries would be useful, and some typical controls around those risks, but I won't go into any more detail on that, but I do think that's a real feature of what we have coming in the next 10 years. Regarding COVID, I think like everyone else, we had to navigate some cautious territory in Australia for the 2021 census, and we ended up with a lot more structure and discipline around crisis management than we've had before. And so as we're looking towards our 2026 census, I guess we want to take learnings from the previous census, but rather than being prepared for another COVID census, or prepared for the issues that we've come from, we're really thinking about how do we make sure that we're robust and prepared for whatever crisis is there for the future. So it's a bit of a cautionary tale for us in Australia of looking back at the previous crisis, because we did have issues in 2016 with our technology, and we were very well prepared for that in 2021, but were hit by a whole lot of other issues that weren't related to technology. So it's about having those robust crisis management procedures and risk mitigation in place. The other thing I just quickly will say about COVID while I have the microphone is that there were a number of, I guess, negative effects that we've all identified, but COVID actually had some positive effects on the data with, societal measures in place in Australia, at least in terms of lockdowns and things where people were at home. We were able to count people in their family units more. We had less people travelling, and so it actually did lead to higher response rates, especially in cities, for the Australian census. And so we're still interested to see what effect it has, when we're in a different situation in the next census, and whether we have other risks that we're not aware of because of the unusual environment that we enjoyed better response in that period. Moving on quickly, a lot of talk about administrative data in the discussion. There is one area that I thought we're really looking heavily into administrative data in Australia at the moment around occupancy, and whether dwellings are occupied or not, whether we can target our field resources more effectively to areas where we're confident that houses are occupied and we haven't got response, and also in terms of imputation and making sure we're imputing only for occupied houses. So that was one area that I didn't sort of see reflected in the use of admin data. For task team 6, there's, and it might be back to the risk management side more than task team 6, but there's a lot that I think we could say around logistics and supply chains at the moment, and I know that came up yesterday. I know mail, like the cost of mail for us is skyrocketing, and lots of reduced services, and we've got things like paper supply shortages and things to grapple with for the last couple of censuses. And the final thing I just wanted to note was for task team 8, and also I guess for task team 7 and misinformation and media, social media aspects, we're really seeing a shift in our public consultation around topics for the census and topics for the population in the census that are moving away from a completely focused on statistical needs and more demand for topics related to inclusion and identity. And so I think there's some risks that we are grappling with around subgroups in the population not responding to the census due to feeling excluded. either by the questions we ask or the questions we don't ask on the form. And so that's just a new driver for topics in Australia at least, and I'm sure in some other countries as well, around really considering whether we need to consider broader topics that don't have the classic statistical policy requirements associated with them. So an interesting one that I just thought I would raise. But thank you. That's my time. I will stop talking there. Appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you very much. Very interesting comments and thoughts from Australia experience. We moved to Mexico. So Mr. Mauricio Rodriguez.
Yes, thank you. Good morning from Mexico. I'm still here. Like I'm on my second coffee, so if I start speaking really fast, I will ask you to stop me. So I think many of my comments are going to mirror all the interventions that we already have and what Mark was commenting on the Australian experience. Just to for everybody to be in the same page that we were on the field in 2020 when the pandemic was declared, and we were about like 95% done with the population count when we have to stop being on the field and we have to go back to offices, and then we had a chance to go back in June. So we have some experience on how we have to deal with all those changes. And now we are preparing the 2025 population count, which is, again, we are learning a lot from our previous experience, but I'm pretty sure all the discussions that we will have here are going to be, well, we are going to be on the field by the time these PNR are hopefully are going to be approved, but pretty sure all the discussions are going to be useful. So in general, what the comments that we had in INEGIO from Mexico, I think the task team 1 probably is going to be we'll have a lot of work working on this emergency preparedness and contingency planning, because everybody's going to be expecting to see something regarding COVID and how to handle COVID. So I don't know if this is going to be a lot of work for this task team, or probably create a specific team for this, but it's something that we should keep in mind. Another specific comment that we had was, of course, we have to include all the new international recommendations about, and Sefi was commenting on this, international migration, refugees, displaced populations. But sometimes with specific topics, and this and migration being something that is always being discussed in Mexico, we have to be careful with on keep the comparability, the historical series that we have. So we have to be careful, and I'm pretty sure the task team analyzing those topics should include that discussion about like how we are going to incorporate the new recommendations while trying to keep in comparability in time in order to have the historical series. Also, it is not a general topic or a general problem that will be faced, but in some countries we're still having issues with some I will call it sensitive topics, and I know some countries have been really successful at collecting information. The variable that comes to my mind right now is gender. In Mexico, we receive a lot of comments, a lot of requests from different departments in the country and for academia to include the gender identity variable, but that is a sensitive topic in Mexico. So I'm pretty sure that countries that are already collecting that information could provide a lot of feedback or a lot of recommendations on how to include this variable, but while keeping the questionnaire really, really short, because sometimes we have to include like 4 or 5 questions, which would be complicated. And also, I had something here, because a lot of the things that I have, I was like checking on the comments that people were already discussing in the previous interventions. But I think that a task team that has to will have to discuss a lot is the trade-off between data privacy and dissemination of micro data. That we are always facing that. That we're always receiving requests from to access micro data. We have to. Most of the time, we have to say no. You have to come here. You have to ask us for specific or for aggregates. But I think that's something that we have to discuss, because it is really, really well, the number of requests that we receive every week or every day are increasing because people want to have access to microdata. So probably creating more specific guidelines on how to grant access, and it has to do with the dissemination process and how we are going to share the information that we produce in the census, but at the same time, protecting the privacy of the population is something really important. Let me see what else I have here. Yes, I was checking everything between here. And yes, of course, the politicization and the social media management. As I was telling you, we were on the field when COVID hit Mexico. And so we have to face a lot of negative campaigns, essentially people from INEGI, because we have some specific vests and hats. So essentially we were pictures were posted on social media with the virus here, with people from INEGI walking around the country. So that was something that we had to deal in 2020, and that was way before TikTok. So I'm pretty sure that's going to be something that we have to keep in mind for everybody who's going to be exploring these channels of like essentially making people getting close to the information from the census. And I think that those would be my comments, because in general, everything was covered either by the previous interventions or by Mark from Australia. So I think it would be better to have more time for discussion from everybody else. So thank you.
Thank you very much for raising this valid points, especially for when adding new items to the census questionnaires and adapting a new framework. So this will be and the task teams will be treated and explained. So we move to Norway. So Mr. Anderson, Norway.
I said thank you to the chair for the opportunity to provide some general comments on this topic. Since I have some technical issues in the beginning of yesterday's meeting, I should introduce myself. My name is Espen Andersen, and I am responsible project manager for the 2021 census project in Norway, and I'm also team leader for the team in our unit that's responsible for the regular statistics on population in Norway. First, I also will support the division of the important work of this, the division into these 9 task teams. Since I represent a country who conducts a register-based census, I will give a brief comment from this perspective. In Norway, we decided to gradually move towards a register-based census system more than 60 years ago, and the first register-based census was conducted in 2011. Having said that, it was a challenging journey, especially creating a good statistical system to produce data on housing and households. And as we heard yesterday from the Netherlands, the register-based approach has many advantages. For many of the challenges we face, registers can be a good alternative for some countries for future censuses. But one important difference, as most of you, I guess, know, between a register-based census and a traditional census is when having a register-based census or a combined census, the NSI, of course, don't have the same degree of control of the data collection as in a traditional census. And of course, the administrative data are collected for all other reasons than statistics, and the concepts used in the register data may differ from country to country, and the concepts can also differ to the concept advised to use in the census. So when creating a statistic based on registers, you must to some extent take the definitions used in the registers into account. Therefore it's important with more flexibility in the definitions on the topics if you use other data capture methods than traditional data collection. And I think that's very important to keep in mind. And that also means, as pointed out earlier, both in the concept note and in the presentation by the UNST. Other data collection methods affects more stages in the data collection process. Hence, the good communication between the different task teams, as many has noted, is very important. I think that's crucial for a good result. Of course, it's also important to see the recommendations in the context of the existing guidelines. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson, for this reflection, especially for the concepts and definition when we have different type of non-traditional census. So now I move to Mr. Nasser Saleh from Qatar. He was the head of the previous census 2020 for his reflection. Nasser.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon for all of you. Actually, some of which have been already discussed by our colleagues, but I have some additional scope of work for some of the teams. For Team 1, if possible, to provide guidance for the low-income countries to overcome the lack of census budgeting problem. If we put for them as a guidelines or a recommendation, it will be good. The second point is in same task team, including the artificial intelligence and the possible activities for innovation and experimentation to modernize future census process to make future census more resilient to external shock. For the second team, recommendation of possible to prepare an international standard for classification of building and housing, because already we make this exercise and it was very excellent for our country, and this classification help us to exchanging the data of building between us and the other data sources. The third recommendation for third task team, elaboration on the methodology of combining the field work, because this is what we done it in 2020, and the administrative record data to establishment a foundation for the census data that enable countries to transfer the registered based census in the future. I think this exercise will be very useful for who will start with the business register or data administration, to combine between the field work and the data administration, to be sure all the administrative record are with high quality and the high coverage also. This is my recommendation, but some of them, as I told you, some of our colleagues already, they say it, and I don't like to repeat what my colleagues say it. Thank you.
Thank you, Nasser, for this additional comments, and especially for the budgeting issues that many countries are suffering from. And now we move to another country. So we move to Mr. Luis Vega from Spain.
Hello, good morning.
Hello, yes.
Good evening, good afternoon to everybody. Well, I have prepared a brief presentation. Please, can you confirm me that you can see the slides?
Yes, we can see it. So if you can go and quickly, please. Thank you.
Okay, yes, I will go very brief, and it's a bit difficult after being the fifth in the list to share with you new comments, but I will try to share some new ideas. Well, as Seifi mentioned, we have seen the principles and recommendations organized in 4 chapters, and that you can see here. And also we have 9 task teams that are listed here. And I did the exercise of linking the task teams with the pages of the principles and recommendations with the different parts. And after doing this exercise, I obtained this table where we can see the amount of work of each task team. Of course, maybe this is not a direct indicator of how big is the amount of work of each task team, but you can see differences. For example, the task team number 8, they have 72 pages to work on, and on the other side, task team number 2, they don't have any page at all specific for concept, population concept and definitions. So after this exercise, I answered to some questions. If I agree with the definition of the 9 task teams, well, in principle, yes, I agree with them, but maybe some concentration is needed. I think it's a strategic decision, the amount of task teams that we need. If we have less task teams, then we could have more people inside of them, but the issues could be less specific. But on the other side, if we have more task teams, then we could have less people inside of them, and then the work could be more specific. So this could be a strategic decision. So maybe some concentration could be desirable. For example, task team 2 could be maybe joined with another task team, for example, with task team 3, and task team 4 that deals with geographic issues could also be very specific. Maybe that's an idea. Important issues that were not covered. Well, not new task teams, but maybe some more relevance could be given to emergency plans, technological issue, for example, artificial intelligence, big data. I think all these issues have been mentioned before. And one issue that, from my point of view as a register-based country, that has to be mentioned is that it's important in this topic, the size of the country. It's most of the examples that have carried out, most of the countries that have succeeded carrying out a register-based approach census are small countries, and it's not the size is an issue in moving to a register-based approach. I think that's important to mention. And if we move to the scope of the work, I think it's a good scope and they cover enough ground. And in some cases, it could be even difficult to deal with all details. Some suggestions that could be good ideas from my point of view could be including in this recommendation some box cases studies with success cases from some specific countries. That could be an idea. I have seen this in our recommendations. And for example, new topics could be, for example, the multi-residence, information about recycling, energy saving methods, availability of services around the dwellings, well, and more ideas that I could bring, but I think it's okay. And one issue that I think it's important is that we don't have many time, because we are in May and the task team activities should be done between June and October, and at least the first deliverable, and we have the summer break in the middle, so there is a short period of time. So this issue, I think it's also important to consider. Well, that's all from my side. I hope you find this interesting. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. This is very interesting and useful. And if you can share your presentation with Seifi and with the participants.
I have already done it. They have my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we move to the last participants to the South Africa, to Mr. Omar. He was the head of census in 2022. So, Omar.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon to colleagues from Pretoria. It's interesting as you come to the end, and a lot of the important points have been raised by my colleagues. But at the outset, let me commend the UNSD team in their preparation of the work plan. I think it's well organized and similar to as my previous colleagues have indicated. I think the scope is exhaustive. There are a few pointers that have come in from yesterday and today that we've picked up. And I think with what my colleague from Spain said earlier, it's important that yes, big data, admin data are key players in the horizon. But again, it's dependent on size of the country and how strong your registers are. So it's important that we do not spend too much time or force countries into that way, the same way in which the 2020 round, in some cases, we did regard it as the CAPI or technology phase, but technology is just the enabler. It's not the actual replacement of solid census methodologies. In terms of the actual TTs, yes, a good thing is that in many cases, we're working out of a blank slate. So we do have a lot of exhaustive information. It's more in terms of review and updating, and in some cases, an injection of new issues. So the important things needs to be around how much of detail we actually put in. And I think this is important more specifically around the fact that we are looking at a handbook also at some stage that needs to be updated. These are PNRs, they key guiding lines to countries on lessons learned, challenges, and good examples or best practices. But in reality, there will have to be a guideline set out so that these PNRs do not become, I would say, handbooks or similar to even the detailed guidelines, because the level of detail is a key issue in terms of what you put in. So purely in terms of what we might want to do is look at ways of parking a whole lot of issues from TTs that might need to be expanded on at a later stage, or like when we had electronic data collection, there was a guideline, or the handbook around the management of censuses, which is a separate document and would then need to be updated. And I'm not too sure what UNSD's plans are in that regard. The other thing that I think that's quite important is that, you know, this is a very useful book, and as colleagues have seen, it's about, 100 pages on content and about 160 pages on the other parts of the census from planning to implementation. If we even simply look at how we want this to be utilized and not just become a beautiful book on the wall, or those that print it, or those that get a printed copy, but from the previous versions, but how do we make it implementable? And my actual request to this group is we need to look at mechanisms in which we can make the PNR the go-to or the how-to guide, but at the same time have these good guides that can basically expand. You know, a lot of us have become dependent on wikis, and I think we need to possibly look at expansion of that into documentation wikis or even data banks or various sub-documents that can assist in country sharing in this regard. There's a lot of smaller things that I think colleagues have spoken to. In the end, I think if you look at efficiency, yes, there might be 1 or 2 TTs that we can collapse. The content-related ones, again, yes, there's a lot of information to follow through, some of which will not change at all, some of which just remains standard and true. So I would rather say the content-related ones, TT2 and 8 and 9, need to possibly be looked at because they have very close dependencies, either into 1 or 2 TTs. But in the end, I think how do we make this document truly workable and functional, practical, so that we can always utilize it? And I think that's going to be our challenge. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Omar, for this contributions. So saying the last one, the South Africa. So I thank all the discussant of this session, and will open the floor for the colleagues to questions to question to the 6 discussant. So the floor is open.
I see hands, Jeff hands.
Jeff, I think it's an old one or it's a new one. Jeff. Old one. Okay. We have some chat. In the chat, we have some questions or suggestions. So Olivier, he asked, should we have a 10 task force or task team composed on the chairs of the 9th to coordinate and to avoid duplicates? So it's for you, Saifi. So we have from Jeff, we have a quick research. He made a quick word search, shows administrative data is included in 5 out of 9 task team descriptions. How do we manage cross-cutting issues like this? So if we don't have further questions, we go back to Saifi if you want. Rodriguez, okay. Mr. Rodriguez.
Yeah, Mauricio again. Sorry,
Yes.
my last name is first on the screen. Yes, and I think this is something that I wrote down and I forgot to mention, and it has to do with the comment about the 10th task team. I think probably not a task team, but since there will be overlaps between the work that all the teams are going to be like reviewing and doing, probably planning specific meetings for chairs of the task teams will be more useful than create a new task team. And I'm the one who tries to avoid unnecessary meetings, but I think this meeting probably will be useful in order to not to avoid overlaps, but essentially to coordinate these overlaps that we will find.
Thank you very much. So Thomas, we have Thomas. We promised him to give him the floor again. Thomas.
I just want to. It's not so much about the discussion and the 6th presenter, but it's more about the first part of the session. At the population division, we use census a lot, especially to calibrate our reconstruction of the population of every country in the world population prospect. And what we would like to have a bit more in the PNR is a bit more recommendation in terms of assessment of the data quality, in terms of the PES and different type of coverage and content errors. But also what we would like to have also a bit more. So this is the first point is more related maybe into the TT5. I think this will be included from what I understand, but I want to make sure that this will be the case. And also another point that is important is in terms of dissemination and utilization. There is a need to have something more on the adjustment of the data, on what should a recommendation on not only post-censal estimate, but also inter-censal estimates, because this is important in terms of policy planning, in terms of computation of vital rates, and so on and so forth. So this is something that is not a lot reflected so far, and I want to make sure that this is included in the next revision. And this maybe in TT7 can be in terms of dissemination, utilization. It's important that adjusted, unadjusted recommendation are made and what should be recommended for countries. Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas. Thank you very much. So we don't have hands. I move the word to you, Saifi. Before that, I close the session. So,
okay.
Saifi.
Thank you, Ismail. Reacting to Thomas's comments. Absolutely, we have a task team dedicated to quality, including assessments of the census in terms of quality of operations and processes, as well as quality of data. Not only making assessments, but also we hope to have elaboration and guidance on adjustments, and also on the provision of metadata on the adjustments as well, in order to aid analytical studies. So definitely those concerns are addressed within the existing task teams. There was a question from Olivier, the World Bank, I think on whether there is a need for a task team 10, the coordination, basically for coordination purposes. And I think our colleague from Mexico, Mauricio, has addressed it very well. So what we hope to do is, during my presentation, I mentioned that UNSD will serve as the secretariat for each task team. So some UNSD staff will serve as a secretary for each of the task teams. So UNSD will always be aware of the work that's going on in the different task teams. So we will be aware of any issues regarding overlapping, and also whenever there is a time or a need for coordinating overlapping work. So I don't think we need a new task team 10, but definitely we will have some regular meetings with the chairs of the various task teams, whenever there is a need for it and whenever there is an important decision to make. So definitely, as the secretary at UNSD, will work in terms of making the coordination across the various teams. And when there is an issue of overlapping concern, we will have meetings and we will address those issues as they arise. I think those were the only questions, I think.
Sorry, I'm sorry, Ismail, to interrupt. So can we have a 15 minutes break to conclude this session? Before
yeah, because I have a personal issue, so I cannot continue with you. So if you want to have a break, and then you can conclude, of course, Miriam.
Okay.
So
thank you so much to you and all the colleagues here.
Thank you very much for all the discussion and for you and for all the colleagues around the world. I have to leave you, and will inshallah tomorrow will be with you. Thank you very much. So a break for 15 minutes.
Thank you, Ismail. Thank you. So we will be back in 15 minutes. Hello, colleagues. I hope you had a good rest. I see yeah, all right. Okay, we are ready to continue. Now, I would like to invite Seife to conclude this session and summarize what we received from you as a comment. Seife.
Thank you, Miriam.
Okay.
And first, let me thank all the discussants and those who intervened, including colleagues from Australia, Mexico, Norway, Qatar, Spain, and South Africa. And we have taken note of all the points you have raised. First, in terms of the number of task teams, we make note of suggestion from South Africa and Spain and Mexico. And we will consider combining task team 8 and task team 9 on recommended topics to be collected in a population and housing census. We will merge those two task teams. And then also there was one suggestion to combine task team 2 and task team 3, population concepts and definitions, combine them into task team 3, census methodologies and use of admin data. So we will consider adopting those suggestions. So we will now move from 9 task teams to 7 task teams. I think we accept these suggestions also with the view that there is 25 member countries in this expert group. We also have, of course, colleagues from regional, international agencies who will be members of the expert group. Taking into account the amount of work that we will be doing, and the more task teams we have, the more we will be split over different task teams, and each task team will have fewer members. So taking that point into consideration, we are receptive to the idea and accept the idea of merging task team 8 and task team 9, and merging task team 2 and task team 3. And then now we will have 7 task teams overall. There were also a number of suggestions that were made. I think the one on the need to have a new task team for the chairs of the various task teams, I think I already addressed that because UNSD will be serving as the secretariat for each of the task teams. We will take on the role of making this coordination and also making sure when there is overlapping interests or conflicts, we will be able to address them through convening a meeting of the chairs whenever needed. There was a suggestion from South Africa that this is the principles, recommendations, and the guidance and the discussion in the PNR needs to be high level, and we should leave out detailed discussions to the accompanying handbooks. So we definitely, that's also our vision. The PNR is the foundation for all the full set of methodological guidelines that UNSD produces. So we will, in the same spirit, we will make sure this PNR will be kept at the high level, and then detailed discussion, detailed elaborations will be carried out in the accompanying handbooks. So actually, after we complete the revision of the PNR, we will move on to revising the other accompanying handbook, the handbook on the management of population housing censuses, and the rest of the other handbooks and guidelines, using the information in the PNR and reflecting those in the accompanying set of handbooks. So definitely, we will do that. There was a discussion about how to structure, how to make sure the PNR, we can navigate it, how to index it, how to link it. So we will have a session tomorrow on the structure, the format, and the design of the PNR. So we'll leave those discussions to tomorrow. And another important thing I would like to highlight is also the fact that the PNR is a global set of recommendations. So we also have regional recommendations. We know that the ECE is currently working on regional recommendations on the census. We also usually have the ECA for the Africa region and ACLAC for Latin American group of countries, also have regional adaptations of the global recommendations. In the PNR, the recommendations that we hope to see in the PNR are principles that are applicable to maybe not for a diverse set of countries, those that are developed in terms of statistical capacity, that are on the low level. So some of the principles and recommendations in the PNR need to be global in nature, so we cannot address region-specific concerns in the PNR. So those will be left to the regional recommendations by the various UN regional commissions. I think that's all I wanted to say for now. Thank you, Miriam.
Thank you so much, Seife. Now, we can open the floor just maybe for something important or urgent comments that you may have, because I just want to remind you that tomorrow in the last session, we will present you the main conclusions of this meeting and the decisions that could be given by this group. So tomorrow we have a dedicated session for the conclusion of this meeting. So we will continue actually the discussion to make our decision on the points that we agree together. So if you have any, do you think that this is very critical questions? So please raise your hand. On the summary and conclusions that the Seife just now presented. So I see no hand. Okay, so we would like to thank all the contributors, discussants to this session. It was really very good, very the fruitful discussions we had. Thank you so much. Okay, there is a question from Jeff. Seife, you would like to answer now, or maybe?
Yeah, with regard to whether or not we need a separate task team on the use of administrative data, I think the current task team 3 can address those issues. Any issue related to the use of admin data would be dealt with task team 3. I know in the concept notes there are some references to the use of admin data here and there. So for those, we will coordinate whenever there is over. But the primary task team responsible for elaboration on the use of administrative data will be task team 3. And whenever there is, for example, in task team 5 quality, maybe we can use admin data to assess the quality of census data collected with the traditional method. So in that case, for example, there will be overlapping interests between the two task teams. So in those cases, we will coordinate and make sure these overlapping interests are addressed to the satisfaction of both groups. So basically, I think we feel that task team 3 sufficiently addresses the issue of elaborating on the use of admin data. Thank you.
Thank you, Seife. Now we close this session and we are moving to next session on that we are going to discuss the recommended population topics. I would like to invite William Muhavaf, is Chief of Demographic and the Social Statistics section at the UN ECA. William.
Thanks, Miriam.
Okay, floor's yours.
Sure. Where I am, internet is a bit, so I'll put only my camera at the end, so that people can see me. But I will try to be, using just the audio now. So, colleagues, this is a very important initiative, and I wish, to start by explaining the objectives of the session. So in this session, we are looking at the recommended population topics, and we have to cover 3 objectives. The first one being discussing the implementation of population census topics as recommended in the current version of the PENR. Then the second objective will be to assess which of the core and non-core population topics in the current list need to be revised or removed in terms of concepts, definition, and classification. And thirdly, we'll also discuss potential new topics that should be considered for inclusion in the list of core or non-core population topics to be recommended for the 2030 round. So in this respect, I wish to invite the UNST to make the brief presentation on the summary of the feedback which we provided as an expert group through the questionnaire which you completed for the revision of the PNR. Over to you, UNSD.
Thank you, William. Yeah, I will, on behalf of UNSD, I mean our census team, I will summarize the feedback that we received from you. First of all, thank you so much for all the inputs that you provided. So I hope you can see the presentation.